A woman on a quiet suburban street double-checks her deadbolt before she leaves for work. Solid brass, the good kind, the one the guy at the hardware store swore by. That afternoon, somebody was inside her house in under a minute. And here's the part that stuck with me. When she got home, the deadbolt was still locked. The bolt never moved. The whole door came in around it. I've stood in that doorway more times than I can count, and the homeowner always asks me the same question. How did they get past the lock? They didn't. They never even touched it. My name's Hank Bricklin. I've been turning a wrench and cutting keys for 40 years, and I'm 62 now, so I've seen the trade change 3 or 4 times over. I've installed locks in mansions and trailers and everything in between. I've also been the guy who shows up after the break-in, when it's too late to do anything but sweep up the wood chips and write an estimate. And I'm going to tell you something the lock companies and the alarm guys would rather I kept to myself. The deadbolt you're counting on is probably the strongest part of a very weak setup. You've been guarding the one thing nobody's trying to beat. Let me show you what actually happens. When a door gets forced, it almost never fails at the lock. Look at a splintered door frame after a break-in and you'll see it every time. The wood cracks right there at the side of the frame where the bolt slides in. That little metal plate the bolt goes into, that's called the strike plate. And on 9 out of 10 houses I've worked on, that strike plate is held on by 2 screws about a ½ inch long sunk into a strip of soft pine trim. Think about that. You've got a hardened steel bolt, a solid brass cylinder, a lock that cost you $60–80, and the whole thing is anchored to the house by 2 little screws shorter than your fingernail, biting into a piece of pine that a good push can crack. The lock does its job. The bolt holds. It's the wood around it that gives up. So when somebody puts a shoulder or a boot into that door, the bolt doesn't break and the lock doesn't pick. The frame just splits and the door swings open with the deadbolt still sticking out the side. Locked. Useless. I've pulled bolts out of frames that were still perfectly engaged. The lock was doing everything right. Nobody ever asked it to do the actual hard part. Now here's the fix, and it costs about $8. You go get a box of 3-inch wood screws. You take out those little ½ inch screws in your strike plate, and you drive the long ones in instead. The difference is that a 3-inch screw goes clear through the soft trim and bites into the framing stud behind it, the real structural wood of your house. Now you're not anchored to a strip of pine anymore. You're bolted to the bones of the building. While you're at it, spend another $15–20 on a reinforced strike plate, one of the heavy steel ones with 4 screw holes instead of 2. That one afternoon of work does more for your security than most of what I'm about to warn you about. But hardly anybody knows to do it because there's no company making real money selling you a handful of screws. Let me clear up the other thing, because Hollywood has done real damage here. In the movies, the burglar kneels down at the door with a little set of picks, jiggles for a few seconds, and the lock clicks open. And so people spend a fortune chasing pick-proof, high-security cylinders, thinking that's the threat. In 40 years, you know how many break-ins I've been called to that were actually picked? I can count them on one hand. Picking a lock is slow. It's fiddly. It takes practice and patience and quiet, and it leaves you crouched in a lit doorway looking exactly like what you are. Nobody breaking into a house wants to do that. They want to be in and out fast, and they want it quiet enough that a neighbor walking a dog doesn't look twice. So they don't pick, they force or they find the door you forgot to think about. A shoulder into a weak frame. A pry bar on a door that never got reinforced. A first-floor window with a flimsy latch. That's the real world. The finesse stuff is a magic trick people obsess over, while the actual door sits there held on by pine and prayer. And that tells you where to spend your attention. Chasing an unpickable lock while your frame is held by half-inch screws is like buying a titanium padlock for a paper bag. So let's talk about what the word deadbolt actually buys you, because it's not all the same. There's a grading system for locks. Grade 1, Grade 2, Grade 3. Grade 1 is commercial strength, the stuff that survives real abuse. Grade 3 is the builder grade bottom of the barrel, and I'll be honest with you, that's what's on most houses I visit. When a builder throws up 100 homes, they're buying locks by the pallet, and they're buying the cheapest thing that technically counts as a deadbolt. So the solid lock you inherited when you bought your place might be the weakest one the manufacturer makes. A real Grade 1 deadbolt with a full 1-inch bolt throw is a genuinely tougher piece of hardware, and it's worth the upgrade. But listen to me, because this is the whole point. A Grade 1 lock in a weak frame is still a weak door. The lock is one link in the chain, and I keep watching people polish that one link while the rest of the chain is rusted through. Upgrade the bolt, sure. But if you haven't fixed the frame first, you've upgraded the one part that was already winning. Now, I promised you the stuff the industry keeps quiet, so let me get to the uncomfortable one. There's a technique that can open a huge number of standard locks, the ordinary pin tumbler kind on most front doors, and it's a lot faster and easier than picking. I'm not going to walk anybody through how it's done, and you don't need to know the mechanics to protect yourself. What you need to know is that it exists, that the cheap cylinder on your door is likely vulnerable to it, and that the fix is real. The fix is a bump-resistant or high-security cylinder. Good lock makers build cylinders specifically designed to defeat that attack, and they're not expensive the way you'd think. When you shop, that's the feature to ask for by name. Not, is it strong? Everything says it's strong. Ask if the cylinder is bump resistant. A locksmith will know exactly what you mean, and it separates the real hardware from the stuff that just looks heavy in the package. But even here, notice the pattern. That upgrade matters, and it still comes second to the frame. Because the person coming through your door isn't going to bother with any technique at all if the door itself gives way to a shove. If you're getting something out of this, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I put out one of these every week. Plain talk about keeping your place safe without getting fleeced. It helps an old locksmith out, and it means the next person who's about to overpay for the wrong thing might catch this first. All right? Let me tell you what happens when you call one of the big security companies, because I've cleaned up after their advice plenty of times. They send someone out, and the conversation goes straight to the recurring bill. Monthly monitoring. A slick, smart lock you can open from your phone. Cameras tied to a subscription. Sensors on every window. And some of that has its place. I'm not going to pretend a camera never helped catch anybody. But watch what they skip right over. Not one of them gets down on a knee and checks the length of the screws in your strike plate. Nobody looks at whether your frame is reinforced. Because there's no monthly fee in a box of screws, and there's no upsell in a $20 steel plate. That smart lock they want to sell you for $250, $300, it bolts into the exact same weak frame. It's a fancier cylinder on a door that still splits at the jamb. You've spent $300 making the strongest part of the door even stronger, and the weak part is exactly as weak as it was that morning. I'm not telling you gadgets are worthless. I'm telling you the order is backwards. Harden the door and the frame first, cheap. Then, if you want the camera and the app and all of it, fine. Now you're adding real layers on top of a door that actually holds. Do it the other way around, and you've bought peace of mind you don't actually have. And even a perfect front door only matters if it's the way in. It usually isn't. Here's what I've learned walking the outside of a house before I ever touch the front lock. People pour all their worry into that one front door, the one they see every day, and they leave a half dozen easier ways in wide open. The service door on the side of the garage, the plain one people forget is even a door. It's almost always weaker than the front, and once someone's in the garage, they're working on your house from inside, out of sight of the street. The sliding glass patio door, sitting in its track, is another one. A lot of them can be lifted or worked loose if nobody's ever dropped a bar in the track or added a decent lock. Ground floor windows with the little latch that came from the factory. The spare key under the mat or the fake rock or the top of the door frame. I promise you, every hiding spot you think is clever is the first place a person checks because they're all the same spots. I've found more keys under doormats than I can count. Somebody looking for a way in doesn't fight your strongest point. They walk the perimeter and take the easiest one. So when you're thinking about your house, stop standing at the front door. Walk all the way around it like a stranger would and be honest about which way you'd come in if the front was locked up tight. That's the door to fix next. So what actually stops a break-in? After 40 years, I'll tell you it comes down to two things: time and noise. The person coming in wants to be quick and quiet. Every second you add, every bit of noise you force, every set of eyes you invite makes your house the wrong choice. That's really all deterrence is. Not making your home a fortress, just making it more trouble than the one next door. So you layer it. A reinforced frame means the door doesn't pop on the first hit. It takes several loud tries, and loud is the enemy of anybody who wants to go unnoticed. Motion sensor floodlights that snap on at the side of the house at dusk take away the dark they were counting on. Trimming back the tall shrubs under your windows so there's nowhere to work unseen. A door that's visible from the street instead of tucked behind a fence. None of it is expensive, and none of it is a gadget with a monthly bill. It's just stacking small obstacles until your house stops being the easy one. When my daughter bought her first place, you know what I did the first weekend? I didn't buy her a smart lock. I got under her strike plates with a box of 3-inch screws and a couple of reinforced plates. I put a bar in the patio door track. I threw out the spare key that was sitting on top of the door frame where anybody could sweep a hand and find it. I put a floodlight over the garage door. Cost me less than a nice dinner out. And that door will hold long enough and loud enough that it's simply not worth it. That's the whole trade secret, if you want to call it that. The expensive stuff guards the part that was already winning. The cheap, boring stuff guards the part that actually loses. And the people selling you security make their living keeping those two things confused. Go check your strike plate screws this week. Pull one out and look at how short it really is. I think you're going to be surprised what's been holding your front door on all this time. Now, I told you picking is rare, and it is. But it does happen, and the few tricks that can actually beat a lock are worth knowing so you can shut every one of them down. I already broke those down in another video. It's called 5 Ways Burglars Pick Your Lock in Under 10 Seconds, and it's up on the channel right now. Go watch that one next. I'll see you there.